This is Voices of Ukraine, a podcast from the Harriman Institute at Columbia University. I'm Masha Udentsova-Brenner, the Institute's media manager. You've been hearing this music in every episode since we launched this podcast in March. And if you've been listening all the way through the credits, you'll know that it's by a Ukrainian composer named Ivan Nebesnyy, who's been in Lviv during this war. Today, I'd like to acquaint you with Ivan and to play one of the compositions we've been using in the show in its entirety. The music is haunting, and that's one of the reasons we chose it for this show. It pairs well with the theme of war. When I initially heard it, I'd assumed it was written in response to Russia's invasion of Donbass in 2014, particularly since it says on Ivan's website that How Many Letters to You, the piece you'll hear today, is from 2016. But when I asked Ivan about it, I discovered that the original version of the work, composed for soprano and string orchestra, was written in 1996, and that's the version you've been hearing. The 2016 version was revised so it could be performed by the National Radio Company of Ukraine Symphony Orchestra. In that version, you can hear all sorts of other instruments. When I spoke to Ivan in early April over Zoom, he told me he wrote it in response to the Soviet collapse, when Ukraine suddenly had access to a plethora of previously banned information and the ability to experiment with musical styles.
As a feeling of freedom, it was very exciting for us because it was time of new information for Ukrainians, especially for Ukrainian music. Information about West avant-garde of West Europe and new wave of playing music and new wave of using instrument in music.
Ivan was only 16 when the USSR dissolved overnight. He grew up in Western Ukraine and studied at a music lyceum in Lviv as a boy. The same lyceum that became a shelter for displaced Ukrainians after Russia invaded, and where Serhiy Tereshenko, our doctoral student whom you heard from in episode 1, has been staying with his family since early on in the war. The music you're hearing now is from Sketch of the Child's Voice, the other composition we've been using in the show. Ivan also wrote that one shortly after the collapse. It was during that period that Ivan's music career really took off. He started exploring avant-garde music styles. And composing for television and cinema. Eventually, he moved to Kyiv to start a music production company. That's where he was when Russia invaded Ukraine in February, in his apartment with his wife and 11-year-old daughter. They lasted a week in the capital, continuing to work between the air raid sirens, the explosions. Then they evacuated by train to the west. Ivan stayed in Lviv and registered with the government's draft board, while his wife and daughter crossed the border into Poland, where his daughter is now studying music. Meanwhile, Ivan spends his days volunteering with the Territorial Defense, delivering food and clothing to the army, and other necessary tasks to help in the war against Russia. He also continues making music and working for various TV channels on musical programming to help uplift morale. He speaks with his wife and daughter on video chat every day, and he says that since the war, he's learned to appreciate life in a new way.
It's very simple, happy that we are alive every day. It's very exciting feeling which I was not feel before.
In March, shortly after the war started, one of Ivan's compositions was performed at the Contemporary Ukrainian Music Festival in New York. He'd been invited to go, but when threats of the invasion started, he knew he had to stay put in Ukraine. Ivan has many international opportunities, and I asked him whether he'd thought about leaving ahead of the war.
For me, it would be not comfortable life abroad if my country in a war, and for me it's more important just to be here with our citizens and to help together to our struggle.
As much as he misses his family, Ivan is glad he stayed, and he feels empowered by the demonstration of unity in his country, and hopeful that when the time comes, this unity will lead to a quick and successful rebuilding of it. Since I spoke with Ivan, he started returning to Kyiv because Russia retreated from the capital. Now he splits his time between there and Lviv. I'm really grateful to Ivan for allowing us to license his work, and to my colleague, Marko Andrejczyk, who runs our Ukrainian Studies program, for introducing me to Ivan's music. They're friends who go back a long time. Before I play you Ivan's composition, I want to share some exciting news. This week, Voices of Ukraine was featured on Foreign Policy Magazine's weekly podcast, Foreign Policy Playlist. Every week, they choose an episode from around the world to highlight and interview the host about the series. It's a real honor to be included. You can check it out wherever you get your podcasts. Now, without further ado, here's Ivan Nebesny's How Many Letters to You. It's based on a poem from Vasil Stus, who was alive from 1930 to 1985 and was an active member of the Ukrainian dissident movement. Ivan said he started using Ukrainian verse in his work in order to reawaken the Ukrainian identity that had been suppressed by Russia for so long.
Дишу, не наважуся. Не боронь мені чур, не боронь мені в цілу ногу. частка себе. Засушене зерня.
I hope you enjoyed the music as much as I did. If you want to support Ukraine, please consider donating to razomforukraine.org. That's RAZOM forukraine.org. It was founded in 2014 in the wake of Ukraine's Revolution of Dignity by Dora Komiak, who's on the Harriman Institute's National Advisory Council. Razom has been working directly with volunteers in Ukraine to provide emergency relief where it's needed most. Thank you for listening to Voices of Ukraine, a podcast from the Harriman Institute at Columbia University. I'm Masha Udensova-Brenner. This episode was written and produced by me with editorial help from Nathan Schiller. A huge thank you to Marko Andrejczyk for feedback on the episode. If you're enjoying this series, please subscribe, tell your friends, and leave us a review.